The 5-year-old girl stood beside the white marble table, her small hands pressed against the expensive tablecloth. Her bright red dress was faded and too small but clean. Her hair was braided neatly despite the circumstances. Christopher Bennett looked up from his perfectly prepared salmon, surprised to see a child in this upscale restaurant. "Mister, can I have your leftovers?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you give them to me, I'll tell you a secret." Christopher paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. The child's dark eyes held a seriousness that seemed wrong for someone so young. Around them, other diners in expensive suits and designer dresses continued their conversations, pretending not to notice the small intruder. "How did you get in here?" Christopher asked gently, setting down his fork. "Where are your parents?" "I waited by the door until someone opened it," Grace said matter-of-factly. "Mama is at home. She's sleeping because she's tired from working." The restaurant manager approached, clearly intending to remove the child, but Christopher held up his hand. Something about this little girl captured his attention completely. Her dignity despite her obvious need, the careful way she spoke, the brightness in her eyes that poverty hadn't dimmed. "What's your name?" Christopher asked. "Grace Washington," she replied. "I'm 5 years old. Mama says I'm not supposed to bother people, but I thought maybe you wouldn't mind sharing." Christopher studied the child more carefully. Her shoes had holes, but someone had tried to cover them with colorful tape. Her dress, though faded, was mended with neat stitches. Someone loved this child deeply. "Tell me about this secret," Christopher said, pushing his plate closer to her. Grace's eyes lit up. She climbed onto the chair across from him, her small legs dangling. "My mama hasn't eaten anything for 3 days, she whispered, leaning forward. "She gives me all the food but she pretends she already ate. I know she didn't because I watched her. She puts food on her plate, then gives it to me when she thinks I'm not looking." The words hit Christopher like cold water. He had been complaining internally about the salmon being slightly overcooked, while this child's mother was starving herself to feed her daughter. "That's not all," Grace continued, her voice dropping even lower. "Mama cries at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. She prays for help but says she's too proud to ask anyone. She works at 2 places but the money isn't enough. She sold her pretty necklace last week, the one from my daddy before he went to heaven." Christopher felt something shift inside his chest. Here was this tiny person, carrying the weight of adult knowledge, trying to save her mother the only way she knew how. Do you believe a child's love can change everything? If this story touches your heart, please subscribe and share your thoughts. What would you do if Grace approached your table? "Your mama sounds like a very good person," Christopher said softly. "The best person," Grace agreed. "She reads me stories every night, even when she's so tired she can barely keep her eyes open. She teaches me math with bottle caps and shows me letters on old magazines. She says education is the most important thing, even more important than food." The manager approached again, but Christopher waved him away more firmly this time. He called his assistant, Daniel Thompson, who answered immediately. "Daniel, I need you to pack several meals from the kitchen here. Good, nutritious food. And I need my car brought around immediately." "Sir, I can handle this situation," the manager said, clearly uncomfortable with the scene. "You can handle it by packing enough food for a week," Christopher replied sharply. "And make sure it's your best." Grace watched these proceedings with wide eyes. "Are you really going to help us?" "Yes," Christopher said simply. "But first, I need you to take me to your mama." "She's going to be so embarrassed," Grace said, but her relief was obvious. "She told me never to ask strangers for things. But I was so hungry and I saw you eating alone and you looked kind." Christopher felt his throat tighten. When had he last been called kind? His business associates used words like ruthless, brilliant, demanding. But this child saw kindness. "Sometimes asking for help is the bravest thing we can do," Christopher told her. "Your mama raised a very smart little girl." The food arrived in several containers. Christopher paid his bill and left a tip larger than most people's monthly salary. He lifted Grace down from the chair, noting how light she felt. "My mama's name is Simone," Grace said as they walked toward the door. "She's beautiful and smart. She went to college but then I came along and everything got harder. She says I'm her best blessing though." Outside, Christopher's black sedan waited. Grace stared at it with wonder. "Is this your car? It's so big and shiny." "It is. Would you like to ride in it?" Grace nodded eagerly. As they drove through the city, she pressed her face to the window, narrating everything she saw. Her excitement over simple sights reminded Christopher of how much he'd stopped noticing in his own life. "Turn here," Grace directed. We live in the blue building. It's not fancy like your restaurant, but Mama keeps it very clean. The building was indeed humble, paint peeling and steps cracked. But the small garden out front was well tended, and the windows were spotless. Mama's probably awake now, Grace said. She gets worried when I'm gone too long. Christopher gathered the food containers, his heart pounding strangely. He was about to meet the woman who had raised this remarkable child. The woman who had been starving herself out of love. As they climbed the narrow stairs to the third floor, Christopher realized that whatever happened next would change everything. Grace's simple request for leftovers had already transformed his entire day. He suspected it was about to transform much more than that. Grace knocked on apartment 3B with a special pattern. 3 quick taps, then 2 longer ones. Christopher heard footsteps inside, then the sound of multiple locks being undone. The door opened to reveal a woman in a bright blue uniform, clearly exhausted but instantly alert when she saw her daughter. Simone Washington was indeed beautiful, with warm brown skin and intelligent eyes that widened when she noticed Christopher standing behind Grace. "Grace Marie Washington, where have you been?" Simone asked, pulling her daughter close. Her voice carried relief and worry in equal measure. "I met Mr. Christopher, Mama. He brought us food," Grace announced proudly, pointing to the containers in Christopher's hands. Simone's expression changed to mortification. "Oh no. Grace, what did you do?" "I asked him for his leftovers and he said yes," Grace said simply. "I told him my secret about how you haven't been eating." The color drained from Simone's face. She looked at Christopher with a mixture of embarrassment and panic. "Sir, I'm so sorry. My daughter shouldn't have bothered you. We don't need charity." Christopher saw pride warring with desperation in her eyes. Her uniform was clean but worn, and he noticed how thin she had become. Grace hadn't exaggerated about her mother's situation. "May I come in?" Christopher asked gently. "Your daughter told me some things that concern me as a fellow human being. This isn't charity. It's neighbors helping neighbors." Simone hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was tiny but immaculate. Every surface gleamed despite the worn furniture. Books were stacked everywhere, and Grace's drawings covered the refrigerator. A small table held homework papers and crayons. "Mama, he's really nice," Grace said, taking Christopher's hand. "And he brought enough food for both of us." "Grace, you cannot go around asking strangers for food," Simone said, her voice breaking slightly. "We've talked about this. But you're so hungry, Mama." "I know you are." Christopher set the food containers on the small table. "Mrs. Washington, your daughter approached me because she loves you. She's trying to take care of you the same way you take care of her." Simone sat down heavily in a chair, covering her face with her hands. "This is so embarrassing. We're not usually. I mean, things have been difficult lately, but we manage." "Tell me about your situation," Christopher said, sitting across from her. "Maybe I can help." "I work 2 jobs, Simone said, lifting her head. "I clean offices from midnight to 6 a.m., then I work at a diner from 7 to 3. Grace stays with Mrs. Rodriguez next door while I work nights." Christopher studied her face, noting the exhaustion etched in every line. "That's 17 hours of work. When do you sleep?" "When Grace naps sometimes. Or after she goes to bed." "Mama has a college degree," Grace announced proudly. "She's really smart. She teaches me computer things." Christopher looked at Simone with new interest. "What's your degree in?" "Computer science," Simone said quietly. "I graduated 3 years ago, but then Grace got sick and the medical bills. I had to take whatever work I could find immediately. Entry-level tech positions wanted someone who could start right away and work long hours. I needed flexibility for Grace's appointments." "What kind of medical bills?" Simone glanced at Grace, who was opening one of the food containers. Grace had pneumonia that turned into complications. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks. Even with insurance, the bills were overwhelming. "But I'm all better now," Grace said cheerfully, offering Christopher a piece of bread. "Mama made sure I got the best doctors." Christopher accepted the bread, touched by the child's generosity even in her hunger. He watched Simone reluctantly open a container, her hands shaking slightly. "When did you last eat?" he asked directly. "I eat," Simone said defensively. "Mama, you can tell the truth," Grace said gently. "Mr. Christopher is trying to help us." Simone looked at her daughter, then at Christopher. "Tuesday. I ate on Tuesday. It was Friday afternoon." Christopher felt anger rise in his chest, but not at Simone. At a system that could let someone with her qualifications and work ethic fall through the cracks. "I run a technology company," Christopher said. We're always looking for qualified developers. Simone shook her head immediately. I appreciate the thought, but I can't afford to take time off work for interviews or training. And I need jobs that understand when Grace gets sick or needs me. What if I told you the position comes with full health benefits, flexible hours, and a salary that would let you quit both your other jobs? Simone stared at him. Sir, I don't know what Grace told you, but we're not looking for handouts. This wouldn't be a handout, Christopher said firmly. I'd be getting an employee with a computer science degree who clearly knows how to work hard and solve problems. You've been managing an impossible situation for years. That tells me you're exactly the kind of person my company needs. Grace had been listening to this conversation while eating. Now she looked up at Christopher with serious eyes. Are you going to take care of my mama? She asked. Christopher met her gaze. I'm going to make sure your mama has the chance to take care of herself and you properly. But she has to say yes. All eyes turned to Simone. Christopher could see the internal battle playing out on her face. Pride against need, hope against fear of disappointment. I haven't worked in tech for 3 years, she said slowly. My skills might be outdated. Skills can be updated. Work ethic and intelligence can't be taught, Christopher replied. What do you say? Grace reached over and took her mother's hand. Say yes, Mama. Please. Simone looked at her daughter, then at Christopher. Tears began to fall down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes, thank you. Christopher smiled, feeling something warm spread through his chest. Good. We'll start Monday. And I insist on covering moving expenses to get you closer to the office. Mr. Christopher, Grace said solemnly, you're like a fairy godfather. Christopher laughed, a sound that surprised him with its genuine joy. I've been called many things but never that. As they shared the meal together, Christopher realized that Grace's simple request for leftovers had led him to something he hadn't even known he was missing. A purpose beyond profit, a connection beyond business dealings. This was just the beginning. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. Christopher had arranged for Simone to start her new position at 10 a.m., allowing her time to drop Grace at her new school. The private academy had agreed to accept Grace immediately when Christopher explained the situation. Simone wore a crisp green blouse and black skirt she'd bought over the weekend with money Christopher had advanced her. She looked professional and hopeful as she prepared Grace's lunch. Are you excited about your new school, baby? Simone asked, braiding Grace's hair. Yes, but I'm worried about you starting your new job, Grace said seriously. What if they don't like you? Mr. Christopher already likes me or he wouldn't have hired me, Simone replied, though Christopher could hear the nervousness in her voice when he arrived to drive them. Good morning, ladies, Christopher said, noting how much healthier they both looked after a weekend of regular meals. Ready for your big day? Grace ran to him and hugged his legs. Over the weekend, she had become completely comfortable with him, chattering about everything from her favorite colors to her dreams of becoming a doctor. Mr. Christopher, will you pick me up from school? Grace asked. I'll be there, Christopher promised. Your mama will be busy learning about her new job. They drove to Grace's school first. The building was beautiful, with large windows and a playground that made Grace gasp with delight. But as they walked toward the entrance, Grace suddenly stopped walking. I feel funny, she said, her voice small. Simone knelt beside her immediately. What kind of funny, baby? Dizzy. And my tummy hurts. Christopher watched as Grace's face went pale. Before anyone could react, the little girl's eyes rolled back and she collapsed. Grace! Simone screamed, catching her daughter before she hit the ground. Christopher was already calling 911 on his phone while kneeling beside them. Grace's breathing was shallow, her small body limp in her mother's arms. The ambulance is coming, Christopher said, his voice steady despite the panic he felt. Simone, look at me. She's going to be okay. This happened before when she got so sick, Simone said, tears streaming down her face. The doctors said malnutrition could cause complications even after recovery. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Christopher rode with them to the hospital, holding Simone's hand as she held Grace. The paramedics worked efficiently, starting in 4 and monitoring Grace's vital signs. At the hospital, they were immediately taken to the emergency room. Dr. Patricia Johnson, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, examined Grace while asking Simone detailed questions about her medical history. She had severe pneumonia last year that led to complications, Simone explained. She recovered, but she's been prone to fatigue and occasional dizzy spells. And her recent nutritional status? Dr. Johnson asked gently. Simone's face crumpled. It hasn't been good. We've struggled with food security. But this weekend she ate well, I made sure of that. Sometimes when a child has been malnourished, their body needs time to adjust to regular nutrition again, the doctor explained. Her blood sugar is very low, and she's dehydrated despite drinking fluids. We need to keep her for observation and run some tests. Whatever she needs, Christopher said immediately. Cost is not a concern. Dr. Johnson looked between Christopher and Simone, clearly trying to understand their relationship. Are you the father? He's our friend, Simone said quietly. A very good friend. I'll handle all the medical expenses, Christopher added. Please do whatever is necessary. Over the next several hours, they waited as doctors ran tests and monitored Grace. She woke up briefly, long enough to ask for her mama and to tell Christopher she was sorry for missing her first day of school. Don't worry about school, Christopher said, smoothing her hair. School will wait for you. But I wanted to learn new things to tell you about, Grace said weakly. Christopher felt his heart clench. This child, even while sick, was thinking about others. As Grace slept, Christopher and Simone sat in the waiting room. Simone had been crying quietly, overwhelmed by fear and gratitude. I can't afford this, she whispered. Even with insurance if she needs to stay for days. You don't need to afford it, Christopher said firmly. I meant what I said. Whatever she needs. Why are you doing this? Simone asked, looking at him with confusion and wonder. We're strangers. You don't owe us anything. Christopher was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. Your daughter asked me for leftovers. Such a simple request, but it opened my eyes to something I'd been missing. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I've never felt as useful as I have this past week, helping you too. But this is so much. The job, the apartment, now medical bills. Simone, Christopher said, turning to face her fully. Do you know what I was doing before Grace approached my table? Eating alone, again thinking about profit margins and stock prices. I have a beautiful home that echoes because it's so empty. I have every material thing I could want, but I hadn't felt genuine joy in years. He paused, watching through the window as nurses checked on Grace. That little girl taught me something in 5 minutes that I'd forgotten in 20 years of business. She taught me what it means to love someone so much you'd sacrifice everything for them. Watching you work 2 jobs and starve yourself for her showed me what real strength looks like. Simone was crying again, but these tears seemed different. She is pretty amazing. You both are, Christopher said simply. Dr. Johnson appeared with test results. Good news. Grace is responding well to the 4 fluids and nutrition supplements. Her blood work shows she's been under significant nutritional stress, but there's no permanent damage. With proper nutrition and rest, she should recover completely. How long does she need to stay? Simone asked. I'd like to keep her overnight for observation, then she can go home tomorrow with some dietary guidelines and supplements. Christopher stood up. Doctor, what would you recommend for preventing this from happening again? Regular, nutritious meals, plenty of rest, and follow-up appointments to monitor her progress. Children who've experienced food insecurity sometimes need extra support getting back to optimal health. She'll have everything she needs, Christopher promised. That evening, as Grace slept in her hospital bed, Christopher sat beside Simone in the chair next to her daughter. The little girl looked so small surrounded by medical equipment, but her color was already improving. I was so scared, Simone admitted. When she collapsed, all I could think about was losing her. But you didn't lose her, Christopher said. She's going to be fine. And she's never going to have to worry about having enough food again. Simone looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You really mean that? I really do. As they kept vigil over Grace, Christopher realized that his life had fundamentally changed. This wasn't about charity or guilt anymore. These 2 people had become genuinely important to him. Grace's crisis had shown him just how much they meant to him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were safe. And that was enough. Tuesday morning brought sunshine through the hospital windows and the wonderful sight of Grace sitting up in bed, coloring in a new book Christopher had brought her. Look, Mr. Christopher, Grace said, showing him her picture of a house with 3 people standing in front of it. That's you, me, and Mama. Christopher studied the drawing, noting that she'd colored his shirt bright blue and given him a smile that stretched across his entire face. It's beautiful, Grace. Am I really that tall? You're the tallest nice person I know, Grace replied seriously. Dr. Johnson arrived with discharge papers and a smile. This young lady is ready to go home. Her blood work is much better, and she's been keeping food down well. What about school? Grace asked. Can I start today? Let's give you one more day to rest, Simone said, smoothing her daughter's hair. Tomorrow will be soon enough. Christopher had spent the morning making arrangements. Grace's new school was expecting her Wednesday, and he'd arranged for a car service to take Simone to and from work until they could get settled into their new apartment. About that job, Simone said as they prepared to leave the hospital. Are you sure you still want me to start? I know this whole situation has been complicated. More sure than ever, Christopher replied. But I have a confession. I did some research on your college projects and grades. You graduated summa cum laude with a focus on mobile app development. Simone looked embarrassed. That was a long time ago. 3 years isn't that long in technology. And talent doesn't expire. Christopher helped Grace into her coat. I'd like you to meet with our development team leader, but not for an entry-level position. I think you'd be perfect for our new mobile applications division. I haven't kept up with the latest frameworks, Simone protested. That's what training periods are for. We'll give you 2 weeks to get up to speed, full pay, flexible schedule so you can spend time with Grace. As they walked to the car, Grace skipping between them despite the previous day's scare, Christopher felt a contentment he'd never experienced. The simple act of helping this family had given his life a purpose he hadn't realized he was missing. Their first stop was the new apartment Christopher had found for them. It was in a safe neighborhood, close to both Grace's school and Christopher's office building. When Simone saw it, she stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed. This is too much, she said, looking at the bright, spacious rooms and modern kitchen. It's perfect, Grace declared, running to the large windows that overlooked a small park. Mama, look, there's a playground right outside. Christopher had furnished it simply but comfortably, with a desk area where Simone could work from home when needed and a bookshelf already filled with children's books and programming guides he thought she might find useful. The lease is in your name, Christopher told Simone. I've covered the first year, but after that your salary will more than cover the rent. Simone walked through the apartment slowly, touching the clean walls and new furniture. In the smaller bedroom she found a bed perfectly sized for Grace, covered with a bright red comforter and surrounded by stuffed animals. This is like a dream, she whispered. Dreams are supposed to come true, Grace said matter-of-factly. That's why we dream them. That afternoon, Christopher took them to his office building. The tech company occupied 4 floors of a downtown high-rise, with open workspaces, modern equipment, and a casual atmosphere that encouraged creativity. This is incredible, Simone said, looking around at the development floor where programmers worked at multiple monitors, collaborating on projects that would affect millions of users. Simone Washington, I'd like you to meet Jennifer Murphy, our head of mobile development, Christopher said, introducing an energetic woman in her 30s. I'm so excited to have you join the team, Jennifer said warmly. Christopher told me about your background. We've been needing someone with your skills for months. Grace sat in Christopher's office while Simone toured the development area, drawing pictures and asking questions about everything she saw. Why do you have so many computers? She asked. Different computers do different jobs, Christopher explained. Some help us design programs, others test them to make sure they work properly. Could you teach me to use them? When you're older, absolutely. Grace nodded solemnly. Mama says education is the most important thing. More important than anything. Your mama is very wise. When Simone returned from her tour, her eyes were bright with excitement. They want me to work on developing educational apps for children. It's exactly what I dreamed of doing in college. And you start Monday with a 2-week training period, Jennifer added. Flexible hours, full benefits, and a starting salary that should make life much more comfortable. As they drove home that evening, Grace chattered about her new room while Simone sat quietly, processing everything that had happened. This doesn't feel real, Simone finally said. A week ago, I was working 17 hours a day and still couldn't pay our bills. Now you have a chance to use your talents and build a real future for yourself and Grace, Christopher finished. You deserve this, Simone. Both of you do. But why us? You could help anyone. Christopher glanced in the rearview mirror at Grace, who was arranging her new stuffed animals in the back seat. Because Grace had the courage to ask for help, and you had the strength to accept it. Because in a world full of people who've forgotten how to be kind, you two reminded me what really matters. That night, as Christopher helped them settle into their new apartment, Grace took his hand and led him to her new bedroom window. Look, she said, pointing at the playground below. Tomorrow I can play and Mama can watch from the window while she studies her computer things. That sounds perfect, Christopher said. Grace looked up at him with those serious dark eyes that had first captured his attention. Mr. Christopher, Are you going to stay our friend forever? The question hit him unexpectedly. He knelt down to her level, understanding that this moment was important. If you and your mama will have me, yes, he said. Forever. Grace hugged him tightly. Good. Because mama smiles different now and I like it. As Christopher drove home to his own empty penthouse later that night, he realized that Grace was right. He was smiling differently too. The next phase of their journey was just beginning, and for the first time in years he was genuinely excited about the future. 3 weeks later, Simone sat at her new desk in the mobile development department, completely absorbed in coding an educational app for elementary school children. The program would teach basic math through interactive games, and she'd been working on it with passionate focus. How's it coming along? Jennifer asked, stopping by Simone's workstation. I think I've solved the user interface problem, Simone said excitedly, turning her monitor so Jennifer could see. Instead of traditional number buttons, the children drag and drop colorful objects to solve problems. This is brilliant, Jennifer said, studying the clean, intuitive design. The kids will love the visual approach. Have you shown Christopher yet? He's in meetings all morning, but I hope to catch him later. The past 3 weeks had been transformative. Simone's natural talent for programming, combined with her intimate understanding of how children learn, had made her invaluable to the team. She'd already contributed ideas to 2 other projects and had impressed everyone with her creativity and work ethic. Meanwhile, Grace was thriving at her new school. She'd made friends quickly and came home each day bubbling with stories about her teachers and classmates. Her health had improved dramatically with regular, nutritious meals and proper rest. Mama, guess what I learned today? Grace said that afternoon when Christopher picked her up from school. This had become their routine. He would collect Grace and bring her to the office, where she would do her homework in his office while waiting for Simone to finish work. What did you learn? Christopher asked, helping her into the car. I learned about fractions. Mrs. Peterson showed us with pizza slices. If you cut a pizza into 8 pieces and eat 3, you've eaten 3/8 of the pizza. That's very good. Are you hungry for some fractions of pizza for dinner? Grace giggled. Can we get pizza? Real pizza, not just the pictures? We can get whatever you want, Christopher said, still marveling at how such simple requests from Grace could bring him such joy. At the office, Grace settled into her usual spot in Christopher's office, a small desk he had brought in just for her. She spread out her homework and began working on math problems while Christopher returned phone calls. Mr. Christopher, Grace said during a break between his calls, I wrote something for you. She handed him a piece of paper covered in careful first-grade handwriting. Dear Mr. Christopher, it read. Thank you for helping me and Mama. You are the nicest person in the world. I hope you like being our family friend forever. Love, Grace. Christopher felt his throat tighten as he read the simple words. Over the past month, both Grace and Simone had become central to his daily happiness. He looked forward to their evening meals together, to Grace's constant questions and observations, to watching Simone's confidence grow as she rediscovered her professional skills. This is beautiful, Grace. Thank you. Do you really like being our family friend? Christopher set down his phone and gave Grace his full attention. I love being your family friend. You and your mama have made my life so much better. Good, because Mama says you're the best thing that's happened to us in a long time. When Simone finished work that evening, she was practically glowing with excitement. Christopher, I need to show you something, she said, pulling up her project on his computer. The educational app was remarkable. The interface was intuitive and engaging, the graphics were bright and appealing, and the learning progression was perfectly calibrated for young children. This is exceptional work, Christopher said, genuinely impressed. How long did this take you to develop? 2 weeks, but I've been staying late and working on it during my lunch breaks. I just got so excited about the possibilities. Christopher studied the program more carefully. The attention to detail was extraordinary, from the encouraging messages that appeared when children solved problems correctly to the gentle hints that guided them when they were stuck. Have you tested this with actual children? I've been testing it with Grace and some of her new friends. They love it. Grace has actually been asking to do extra math homework so she can play with the app. Christopher made a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. Simone, I want to propose something. What if this app became its own project with you as the lead developer? We could build an entire educational platform around your concept. Simone stared at him. Are you serious? Completely. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking our company needs. You'd have your own team, your own budget, and full creative control. But I've only been here 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks, You've created something that could help thousands of children learn more effectively. Talent like yours doesn't need a timeline. Grace had been listening to this conversation with growing excitement. Mama, that means kids everywhere could use your game to learn math? It could, baby. If Mr. Christopher really thinks it's that good. I know it's that good, Christopher said firmly. The question is, are you ready to take on a leadership role? Simone looked at Grace, then back at Christopher. The little girl who had once asked for leftovers was now sitting in a corporate office, watching her mother be offered the opportunity of a lifetime. Yes, Simone said, her voice strong and confident. I'm ready. Christopher smiled, feeling pride swell in his chest. Then welcome to your new role as Director of Educational Applications. That evening they celebrated at Grace's favorite restaurant, a family-friendly place with bright decorations and a menu that included both pizza and healthy options. Grace insisted on ordering a pizza cut into 8 slices so she could practice her fractions. I'm so proud of your mama, Christopher told Grace as Simone stepped outside to call her neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez with the good news. She's really smart, Grace said. She always was, even when we didn't have much money. Smart doesn't go away just because you're poor. The wisdom of this observation struck Christopher powerfully. Grace, at 5 years old, understood something that many adults missed. Circumstances didn't define worth. Simone had always been brilliant and capable. She just needed the opportunity to show it. When Simone returned to the table, her eyes were bright with tears of joy. Mrs. Rodriguez is so excited. She says she always knew something good would happen for us. She was right, Christopher said. And this is just the beginning. As they walked to the car after dinner, Grace slipped her hand into Christopher's while taking her mother's hand with the other. Now we're like a real family, she said contentedly. We walk together, we eat together, and we take care of each other. Christopher looked down at the little girl who had changed his entire world with a simple request for leftovers. She was right. Somewhere along the way they had become a family. The realization both thrilled and terrified him. But as Simone smiled at him over Grace's head, her eyes full of warmth and gratitude that was transforming into something deeper, Christopher decided that being terrified might be worth it. For the first time in his adult life, he had something more valuable than money or success. He had love. And he was beginning to hope that maybe, just maybe, it was the kind of love that could last forever. 2 months into Simone's new role as Director of Educational Applications, her team had grown to include 3 other developers and a graphic designer. The educational app she created was in beta testing at 5 local elementary schools, and the results were exceeding everyone's expectations. The children's math scores have improved by an average of 23% since they started using Simone's program, Jennifer reported during the monthly department meeting. Teachers are saying they've never seen kids so excited about homework. Christopher watched Simone accept the praise with a mixture of pride and humility that had become one of her defining characteristics. Success hadn't changed her essential nature. She still approached each day with gratitude and worked with the same dedication she'd shown when cleaning offices at midnight. What's our timeline for full release? Christopher asked. 6 more weeks of testing, then we can launch nationally, Simone replied. I'd also like to propose expanding into reading and science apps using the same interactive principles. Approved, Christopher said immediately. Whatever resources you need. After the meeting, Christopher found Grace in his office, as had become their daily routine. She was working on a science project about butterflies, surrounded by library books and colored pencils. How's the butterfly research going? He asked, settling into his chair beside her small desk. Did you know butterflies taste with their feet? Grace asked, not looking up from her careful drawing of a monarch butterfly. And they can see colors we can't see. I think that would be wonderful, seeing colors that don't have names yet. Christopher marveled, as he often did, at the way Grace's mind worked. At 6 years old, she had an imagination that could find wonder in scientific facts and turn them into poetry. That would be wonderful, he agreed. What else did you learn? Butterflies start as caterpillars, but they don't just grow into butterflies. They have to completely dissolve inside their cocoons and become something totally new. Mrs. Peterson says it's called metamorphosis. That's a big word. It means changing into who you're supposed to be, Grace said seriously. Like how Mama changed from being sad and tired all the time to being happy and excited about her work. The observation stopped Christopher cold. Grace was right. Simone had undergone her own metamorphosis over the past months. The exhausted, worried woman who had been starving herself to feed her daughter had transformed into a confident professional who laughed easily and dreamed big. But it was more than professional success. Simone had relaxed into herself in ways that went beyond work. She sang while making breakfast. She told jokes that made Grace giggle uncontrollably. She'd started wearing brighter colors and letting herself enjoy small pleasures like flowers for their apartment and books that weren't educational. "What about you?" Christopher asked Grace. "Have you had any metamorphosis?" Grace considered this seriously. "I used to be scared a lot. Scared we wouldn't have enough food, scared Mama would get too tired, scared we'd have to move somewhere worse. Now I'm not scared anymore. I'm just excited about things." That evening, Christopher invited Simone and Grace to dinner at his penthouse apartment. They'd shared many meals over the past months, but usually at restaurants or at their apartment. This was the first time they'd visited his home. Grace was enchanted by the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city. "It's like living in the clouds," she said, pressing her face against the glass. But Christopher found himself seeing his home through their eyes, and he didn't entirely like what he saw. Despite its expensive furnishings and artwork, the apartment felt cold and impersonal. It was beautiful, but it wasn't warm. It was impressive, but it wasn't welcoming. "Your home is very fancy," Simone said diplomatically as Christopher showed them around. "It's very empty," he replied honestly. "I bought it because it was the most expensive penthouse in the building, but I never really made it feel like home." "What makes a place feel like home?" Grace asked, examining a sculpture that cost more than most people's cars. Christopher thought about their cozy apartment with Grace's drawings on the refrigerator and Simone's programming books stacked on every available surface. He thought about the warmth that filled those rooms when they were all together. "I think it's the people in it," he said. "And the memories you make there." They ordered Chinese food and ate sitting on the floor around Christopher's expensive glass coffee table, using chopsticks and laughing when Grace tried to pick up slippery noodles. It was the most life his apartment had seen in years. After Grace fell asleep curled up on his couch, Christopher and Simone sat on his balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Thank you," Simone said quietly, "for everything. I know I've said it before, but I don't think you understand how completely you've changed our lives." "You've changed mine too," Christopher replied. "Before I met you and Grace, I was successful but not particularly happy. I had everything I thought I wanted, but I was missing what I actually needed." "What were you missing?" Christopher considered how to answer. "Purpose, I think. Connection. The feeling that what I did mattered beyond profit margins." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city below. Christopher found himself studying Simone's profile, noting the peaceful expression she wore now compared to the strained worry that had marked her features when they first met. "Can I ask you something?" Simone said eventually. "Anything. Why haven't you ever married? Had a family of your own?" It was a question Christopher had expected but wasn't sure how to answer honestly. "I always thought I was too busy building my company. Too focused on success to make time for relationships. But I think the truth is that I never met anyone who made me want to try." Simone looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "And now?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities and uncertainties. Christopher felt his heart racing as he realized they were approaching territory that could change everything between them. "Now I think I might have been waiting for the right people to show up and teach me what really matters," he said carefully. Simone was quiet for a long moment. "Christopher, I need you to know something. What you've done for Grace and me goes beyond kindness. You've given us back our future. But I also need you to know that my gratitude isn't why I—" She trailed off, seeming to struggle with her words. "Why you what?" Christopher asked gently. "Why I've started to care about you as more than just Grace's benefactor," she finished quietly. "I was afraid you might think my feelings were just gratitude, but they're not. They're real." Christopher felt something warm and bright bloom in his chest. "I was afraid of the same thing. That you might feel obligated to care about me because of what I'd done." "No," Simone said firmly. "I care about you because of who you are. Because you listen to Grace's endless questions with genuine interest. Because you've never once made us feel like charity cases. Because you've become someone we both can't imagine living without." Christopher reached over and took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. "I can't imagine my life without you two either. You've become my family." When they went back inside, Grace was still asleep on the couch, looking small and peaceful surrounded by expensive cushions. Christopher looked at this scene, his sterile apartment transformed by the presence of this little girl and her mother, and realized that everything he'd thought he wanted paled in comparison to what he'd found. True wealth wasn't in his bank account. It was sleeping on his couch and sitting beside him on the balcony. It was in the trust of a child and the growing love of an extraordinary woman. The metamorphosis Grace had described was happening to all of them. They were becoming who they were supposed to be together. 6 months after Grace had first asked for leftovers, Simone stood before the board of directors of Christopher's company, presenting the most important proposal of her career. Her educational app had been so successful in beta testing that the company was considering spinning off an entire educational technology division. The results speak for themselves, Simone said, her voice confident as she clicked through her presentation slides. Students using our math application showed an average improvement of 31% in standardized test scores. More importantly, teacher surveys indicate that student engagement with mathematics has increased by over 200%. Christopher watched from the back of the conference room, trying to maintain his professional composure while feeling overwhelmingly proud of how far Simone had come. She commanded the room with natural authority, fielding questions from board members with expertise and grace. "What's your projection for market expansion?" asked Margaret Chin, the company's chief financial officer. "Conservative estimates suggest we could capture 15% of the educational technology market within 3 years, Simone replied. That translates to approximately $50 million in annual revenue by year 3, with profit margins exceeding 40%. The numbers were impressive, but Christopher found himself more interested in watching Simone's passion as she described her vision for helping children learn. This wasn't just about business success for her. It was personal. "I'd like to propose not just expanding our current application, but creating a comprehensive educational platform," Simone continued. "Reading, science, social studies, all using the same interactive principles that have made our math program so effective." Board member Thomas Wright raised his hand. "What makes you confident that success in mathematics will translate to other subjects?" "Because the underlying principle isn't about math," Simone explained. "It's about making learning feel like play while maintaining educational rigor. Children are natural learners. They're curious, creative, and eager to understand the world around them. Traditional educational software often kills that curiosity by making learning feel like work. Our approach preserves the joy of discovery." Christopher found himself thinking about Grace, who had been field testing all of Simone's applications. The little girl had become an unofficial quality assurance expert, identifying problems that adults missed and suggesting improvements that enhanced the user experience. "The proposal is to create EDU Play Technologies as a subsidiary of our main company," Simone said, reaching the heart of her presentation. "I would serve as CEO with full creative control over product development, but with the financial backing and infrastructure support of the parent company." Margaret leaned forward with interest. "You're proposing to lead your own company?" "I'm proposing to build something that could revolutionize how children learn," Simone replied without hesitation. "Something that could level the educational playing field for kids who don't have access to expensive private schools or tutoring services." After the board members left to deliberate, Christopher found Simone standing by the conference room windows, looking out at the city below. "How do you think it went?" she asked. "You were brilliant," Christopher said honestly. "But more than that, you were authentic. They could see that this isn't just about business for you." "It's not. Every time I work on these applications, I think about Grace struggling with her homework in our old apartment, trying to learn by lamplight because we couldn't afford to fix the overhead bulb. I think about all the other children in similar situations who deserve better tools to help them succeed." An hour later, the board reconvened. Margaret spoke for the group. "Ms. Washington, we're prepared to approve your proposal with one modification. Rather than creating a subsidiary, we'd like to offer you the opportunity to launch EDU Play Technologies as an independent company with our venture capital backing." Simone's eyes widened. "Independent? You'd own 51% of the company, we'd retain 49%. You'd have complete creative control and operational authority. It's a bigger risk, but also a bigger reward if you're as successful as we believe you'll be." Christopher felt his heart race. This was beyond anything he'd imagined for Simone when he first offered her a job. She was being offered the chance to build her own empire. "I need some time to think about this," Simone said. "Of course. Take the weekend. Let us know Monday." That evening, the three of them sat in Simone and Grace's apartment, sharing pizza while Grace worked on her homework at the kitchen table. "I can't believe they offered to make me a CEO," Simone said, still processing the day's events. "I can," Grace said without looking up from her math problems. "You're the smartest person I know and you care about helping kids learn. That's exactly what a CEO should be." Christopher marveled at the 6-year-old's matter-of-fact confidence in her mother. Grace had never doubted Simone's capabilities, even during their most difficult days. But it's such a big risk, Simone continued. What if I fail? What if the company doesn't succeed? What if it does succeed? Christopher countered. What if you build something amazing that helps millions of children? And what if you don't try and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? Grace added, displaying wisdom far beyond her years. Simone looked at her daughter with surprise. When did you get so smart about business? I listen when you and Mr. Christopher talk, Grace replied. Also, Mrs. Peterson says that being afraid of something is usually a sign that it's worth doing. That night, after Grace had gone to bed, Christopher and Simone walked through the small park near their apartment. The playground where Grace spent her afternoons was empty now, swings moving gently in the evening breeze. I keep thinking about that day in the restaurant, Simone said. If Grace hadn't been brave enough to ask you for leftovers, none of this would be happening. Grace was brave because she learned it from you, Christopher replied. You worked 2 jobs and sacrificed everything for her. That took incredible courage. This feels different though. Bigger. More public. If I fail as CEO of my own company, it won't just affect Grace and me. Christopher stopped walking and turned to face her. Simone, you've already succeeded at the hardest job in the world. You've raised an extraordinary daughter under impossible circumstances. Running a company will actually be easier than what you've already accomplished. Simone looked at him with an expression of love and gratitude that made his heart skip. How do you always know exactly what to say? Because I believe in you completely. I have since the day I met you. Even when I was embarrassed and trying to refuse your help? Especially then. Your pride and dignity in that moment told me everything I needed to know about your character. They walked home hand in hand, and Christopher realized that his feelings for Simone had grown into something he'd never experienced before. This wasn't just attraction or companionship. This was the kind of love that made him want to build a future together. On Monday morning, Simone walked into the boardroom with confidence and clarity. I accept your offer, she announced. EDU Play Technologies will be honored to partner with you in creating the future of educational software. As the board members congratulated her and began discussing next steps, Christopher felt a surge of pride so intense it was almost overwhelming. The woman who had once been afraid to accept food from a stranger was now launching her own technology company. Grace's simple request for leftovers had led to this moment. Sometimes the biggest changes really did start with the smallest acts of courage. The launch party for EDU Play Technologies was held on a warm Friday evening in June, exactly 1 year after Grace had first approached Christopher's table. The company's new headquarters occupied 2 floors of a renovated building in the Arts District, with bright, open spaces designed to inspire creativity and collaboration. Grace moved through the crowd of investors, employees, and educational professionals like a tiny ambassador, wearing a bright purple dress and confidently shaking hands with adults who towered over her. Thank you for coming to my mama's party, she told Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, the superintendent of the local school district. Mama's apps are going to help lots of kids like me learn better. Christopher watched this interaction with amazement. Grace had grown so much over the past year, not just physically but in confidence and social skills. The shy, hungry child who had asked for leftovers had become a poised, articulate little girl who spoke to billionaires and educators with equal ease. She's remarkable, said Jennifer Murphy, who had joined EDU Play as the head of product development. I've never met a 7-year-old with such natural leadership abilities. She gets it from her mother, Christopher replied, his eyes finding Simone across the room. Simone was surrounded by reporters and potential clients, discussing her vision for making high-quality educational technology accessible to all children, regardless of their economic circumstances. She wore a vibrant emerald green dress that complemented her skin tone beautifully, and her confidence was magnetic. The digital divide in education isn't just about access to computers, she was saying to a journalist from Education Weekly. It's about access to software that truly engages children and helps them develop critical thinking skills. We're committed to ensuring that every child has that access. Christopher felt the familiar swell of pride and something deeper as he watched her. Over the past months, as their professional relationship had evolved into something personal, he discovered that his feelings for Simone went far beyond admiration or attraction. He was genuinely, deeply in love with her intelligence, her compassion, her strength, and her unshakable commitment to making the world better for children. Mr. Christopher, Grace appeared at his side, tugging on his jacket. Mama wants you to come meet some important people. He followed Grace through the crowd to where Simone was speaking with a group that included several school principals and a representative from the Department of Education. Christopher, I'd like you to meet Dr. Robert Anderson from the Federal Education Initiative, Simone said, her hand finding his naturally. Dr. Anderson, this is Christopher Bennett, whose company provided our initial funding and support. Mr. Bennett, Ms. Washington tells me you've been instrumental in EduPlay's development, Dr. Anderson said. We're very impressed with the early results from the pilot programs. Simone deserves all the credit, Christopher replied. I just provided resources. She provided the vision and the expertise. As the evening progressed, Christopher found himself marveling at how natural it felt to stand beside Simone as her partner in every sense of the word. They moved through conversations together, supporting each other's points, sharing meaningful glances, functioning as a team. Later, when most of the guests had gone home and the cleaning crew was packing up, Christopher found Grace curled up asleep in one of the comfortable reading chairs in the children's area of the office. Simone sat beside her, gently stroking her daughter's hair. She was so excited about tonight, but all the socializing wore her out, Simone said softly. She was perfect, Christopher said, settling into the chair across from them. She charmed everyone she met. She's been asking me something lately, Simone said, looking up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What kind of something? She wants to know if you're going to be her daddy. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and emotion. Christopher felt his heart start beating faster. What did you tell her? I told her that was a conversation for adults to have first, Simone replied carefully. But Christopher, I need you to know that whatever your answer is, it won't change how grateful we are for everything you've done for us. Christopher stood up and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her free hand in both of his. Simone, I love you. I love Grace. I love the life we've built together, and I want to make it official and permanent. I want to be Grace's daddy, and I want to be your husband. Tears started flowing down Simone's cheeks. Are you proposing to me? I'm telling you that I want to marry you more than I've ever wanted anything in my life. But I want to do this right. I want Grace to be part of it. Grace's eyes fluttered open at the sound of their voices. Are you talking about the daddy thing? She asked sleepily. Christopher and Simone both laughed. We are, Simone admitted. Grace sat up, suddenly fully alert. Did you ask her yet, Mr. Christopher? I was just about to, Christopher said, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Grace's eyes went wide. Simone Washington, Christopher said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and Grace and whatever other adventures life brings us? Say yes, Mama, Grace whispered urgently. Say yes right now. Simone was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, she said. Yes, of course, yes. As Christopher slipped the ring onto her finger, Grace launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around them in a three-way hug. Now we're really a family, she declared with satisfaction. I knew this would happen. I told Mrs. Peterson at school that you were going to marry us. You told her I was going to marry both of you? Christopher asked, amused. Well, you can't marry just Mama and leave me out, Grace said practically. That wouldn't make any sense. Christopher looked at this extraordinary child who had changed his life with a simple request for leftovers, and at the remarkable woman who had raised her with such love and wisdom despite incredible challenges. You're absolutely right, he said. I'm marrying both of you. We're going to be a real family. As they stood together in the offices of EduPlay Technologies, surrounded by the evidence of how far they'd all come, Christopher realized that his life had been transformed in ways he could never have imagined. Success had taken on an entirely new meaning. The biggest business deal he'd ever made wasn't worth billions of dollars. It was worth something infinitely more valuable. It was worth a lifetime of love with the two people who had taught him what really mattered. Grace's secret, shared over leftovers in an expensive restaurant, had led to this moment. Sometimes the most important business proposals weren't made in boardrooms. Sometimes they were made by children who understood that love was the most powerful force in the world. 3 months later, on a crisp September morning, Christopher stood at the altar of a small church, watching the most important people in his life walk down the aisle toward him. The ceremony was simple but elegant, with white roses and soft lighting creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. Grace came first, taking her role as flower girl very seriously. She wore a bright yellow dress with a full skirt that swirled as she walked, and she scattered rose petals with the precision of someone performing a vital mission. When she reached the altar, she gave Christopher a thumbs up and whispered loudly, "You look very handsome, Daddy Christopher." The word daddy still sent a thrill through his heart every time she said it. Over the past months, Grace had transitioned naturally from calling him Mr. Christopher to just Christopher, to finally settling on Daddy Christopher, which she insisted was different from just Daddy, because it acknowledged their special story. Then Simone appeared at the back of the aisle, and Christopher felt his breath catch. She wore a cream-colored dress that flowed around her like something from a fairy tale, her hair swept up elegantly with small white flowers woven through it. But it wasn't the dress or the flowers that took his breath away. It was the radiant joy on her face, the confidence in her walk, the way she looked at him like he was her entire world. As she walked toward him, accompanied by Mrs. Rodriguez who had insisted on giving her away, Christopher thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a child's desperate request for leftovers to this celebration of love and commitment, every step had seemed both impossible and inevitable. When Simone reached the altar, she handed her bouquet to Grace and took Christopher's hands. The minister, a kind man who had spent an hour with them the week before learning their story, smiled warmly at the unusual family. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today to witness not just the union of Christopher and Simone, but the official creation of a family that has already been growing in love and commitment for over a year." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Christopher and Simone had written their own vows, and when it came time to speak them, Christopher looked directly into Simone's eyes. "Simone, a year and a half ago your daughter asked me for leftovers and offered to tell me a secret. That secret changed my entire life. You taught me what it means to love unconditionally, to work with purpose and to find joy in the smallest moments. You showed me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the depth of our connections with the people we love." He paused, glancing at Grace who was listening intently. "I promise to love you and Grace with everything I have, to support your dreams and ambitions, and to never forget that the best day of my life was the day a little girl asked me to share my food and my heart." Simone's vows brought tears to many eyes in the small congregation. "Christopher, you saw us when we were invisible to most of the world. You didn't just give us food and shelter and opportunity. You gave us hope. You believed in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves. You taught Grace that kindness exists, and you taught me that I deserved to dream again." She looked at Grace, then back at Christopher. "I promise to build a life with you that honors the love that brought us together. I promise to keep creating things that make the world better for children like Grace, and I promise to never take for granted the miracle of finding my soulmate in the most unexpected way." When it came time for the ring exchange, Grace stepped forward with the wedding bands. "These rings are like promises you wear on your fingers," she announced to the congregation, earning chuckles from the guests. "So everyone will know you're a family." After the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Christopher kissed his new bride while Grace cheered and threw the remaining flower petals in the air. The reception was held in the church's fellowship hall, decorated with simple white tablecloths and centerpieces of sunflowers, Grace's favorite. The guest list was small but meaningful. Mrs. Rodriguez sat at the head table, beaming with pride. Jennifer Murphy and several colleagues from EDU Play were there, along with some of Grace's school friends and their parents. Christopher had invited his assistant Daniel and a few close business associates, but for the most part, this was a celebration of the community that had grown up around their little family. During dinner, Grace stood up and tapped her glass with a spoon, demanding everyone's attention. "I want to make a speech," she announced. When the room quieted, she climbed onto her chair so she could see everyone. "My name is Grace Washington Bennett," she said, testing out her new name with obvious pride. "Today my mama married my daddy Christopher, so now we're officially a real family." She paused, looking serious. "Before we met Daddy Christopher, things were really hard. We didn't have enough food and Mama was always tired and worried. But Mama never stopped taking care of me and she never stopped teaching me important things like reading and math and being kind to people." Christopher felt his throat tighten as Grace continued. "Then I asked Daddy Christopher for his leftovers and he said yes. But he didn't just give us food. He gave us a whole new life. He helped Mama get a job where she could use her smart brain, and he helped us move to a nice apartment and he made sure I could go to a good school." The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on the words of this articulate 7-year-old. "But the most important thing he gave us was a family. Now I have a daddy who helps me with my homework and teaches me about computers and takes me to the park. And Mama has someone who loves her and thinks she's the smartest person in the world, which she is." Grace looked directly at Christopher and Simone. "So thank you, Mama, for being the best mama ever. And thank you, Daddy Christopher, for sharing your leftovers and your heart. I love you both more than all the stars in the sky." As Grace climbed down from her chair, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Christopher pulled both his new wife and daughter into his arms, overwhelmed by the depth of his happiness. Later that evening, after they had returned to their new home, A larger house Christopher had bought in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. Grace was getting ready for bed when she made an announcement. "I have another secret to tell you," she said as Simone tucked her in. Christopher and Simone exchanged glances. Grace's secrets had a way of changing everything. "What kind of secret?" Simone asked. "I heard you and Daddy Christopher talking about maybe having a baby brother or sister for me," Grace said. "And I think that would be really nice. But I want you to know that even if you have more kids, I'll always be special because I'm the one who found Daddy Christopher first." Christopher sat down on the edge of Grace's bed, marveling at this child's emotional intelligence. "Grace, you will always be special because you're you. You're the little girl who was brave enough to ask for help when your mama needed it. You're the one who taught me what family really means. No matter how many children we have, you'll always be my first daughter, and that makes you irreplaceable." Grace beamed. "Good. Because I really like being your daughter." As they turned off the lights and headed to their own bedroom, Christopher reflected on how completely his life had been transformed. 18 months ago he had been successful but lonely, rich but empty. Tonight he was surrounded by love, purpose, and the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. All because a little girl had asked for leftovers and offered to share a secret. Sometimes the most important business deals really were made by children who understood that love was the most valuable currency in the world. 1 year after their wedding, Christopher sat in his office, reviewing the quarterly reports for EDU Play Technologies. The company had exceeded every projection, with their educational apps now used in over 3,000 schools across the country. More importantly, early studies showed that children using their software were showing measurable improvements not just in test scores, but in enthusiasm for learning. Grace, now 8 years old and in 3rd grade, sat at her usual desk in the corner of his office, working on a school project about successful businesswomen. She had chosen to write about her mother. "Daddy Christopher, how do you spell entrepreneur?" Grace asked, not looking up from her careful handwriting. "Entrepreneur," Christopher spelled out. "That's a big word for a 3rd grade report." "Mrs. Garcia says we should use advanced vocabulary to challenge ourselves," Grace replied matter-of-factly. "Besides, if I'm going to write about Mama, I need to use the right words." Christopher smiled, still amazed by Grace's academic confidence. The little girl who had once struggled with homework by lamplight was now at the top of her class and had been identified as academically gifted. "What are you writing about, Mama?" he asked. Grace looked up from her paper. "I'm writing about how she started with nothing and built a whole company that helps kids learn better. And how she never gave up even when things were really hard." At that moment, Simone appeared in the doorway of Christopher's office, glowing with happiness and carrying a small wrapped box. "How are my favorite people doing?" she asked, crossing the room to kiss Christopher and ruffle Grace's hair. "Mama, you're interrupting my concentration," Grace said with mock seriousness, but she leaned into her mother's touch. "Sorry, baby. I just had exciting news to share with Daddy Christopher." Christopher noticed the secretive smile on Simone's face and felt curiosity mixed with anticipation. What kind of exciting news? Instead of answering directly, Simone handed him the small box. "Open it." Christopher unwrapped the box carefully, aware that Grace had stopped writing and was watching intently. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a tiny pair of baby booties, soft yellow with white trim. The room went completely silent for a moment as the implication sank in. "Are you?" Christopher began, hardly daring to hope. "I'm pregnant," Simone announced, her face radiating joy. "We're going to have a baby." Grace jumped up from her desk so quickly that her chair fell over. "Really? A real baby brother or sister?" "Really," Simone confirmed, pulling Grace into her arms. Christopher stood up slowly, still holding the tiny booties. The wave of emotion that washed over him was so intense he could barely speak. "How far along?" he managed to ask. 3 months. I wanted to wait until I was sure everything was okay before telling you both." Christopher crossed the room and pulled both his wife and daughter into his arms. "This is incredible," he whispered. "We're really going to have another baby. I'm going to be the best big sister ever," Grace announced with characteristic confidence. "I'll teach the baby about numbers and letters and how to be kind to people." That evening, they celebrated with a quiet family dinner at home. As they ate, Grace peppered them with questions about the baby. "When will it be born? Can I help pick the name? Will it sleep in my room? Can I teach it to use Mama's learning apps?" Christopher and Simone answered each question patiently, marveling at Grace's excitement about becoming a big sister. "You know," Grace said thoughtfully as they cleared the dinner dishes, "this baby is going to be really lucky." "Why is that?" Christopher asked. Because it's going to be born into our family when we're all happy and safe and have everything we need. It won't have to worry about food or having a place to live. And it's going to have the smartest mama and the kindest daddy in the world. Christopher felt his eyes water at Grace's words. She was right. This new baby would indeed be born into completely different circumstances than Grace had experienced as a young child. But you know what? Grace continued, I'm glad things happened the way they did. If we had met you when I was a baby, I wouldn't remember being brave and asking for your leftovers. And that's my favorite story about our family. Later that night, after Grace had gone to bed, Christopher and Simone sat on their back porch, looking out at the garden they had planted together. Simone's head rested on Christopher's shoulder, and his hand lay gently on her still flat stomach. Can you believe we're here? Simone asked softly. 2.5 years ago, I was cleaning offices at midnight and rationing food. Now I'm running my own company and married to the love of my life, about to have a second child. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Grace hadn't been brave enough to approach my table that day, Christopher mused. She would have found another way, Simone said with certainty. Grace has always been determined to take care of the people she loves. If she hadn't met you, she would have figured out something else. Maybe. But I'm grateful it was me she chose to trust with her secret. They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Christopher, Simone said eventually, I have another secret to tell you. He looked at her with surprise. Another secret? Simone's eyes sparkled with mischief. Remember how Grace always says she has secrets to tell people? Well, I think she gets it from me. What's your secret? I love you more today than I did the day we got married. And I love you more than I did yesterday. I think I'm going to keep loving you more every single day for the rest of our lives. Christopher kissed her gently. That's the best secret anyone has ever told me. The next morning brought another surprise. Grace came running into their bedroom early, clutching a piece of paper. I finished my report about Mama, she announced, climbing onto their bed. Want to hear it? Christopher and Simone sat up, suddenly fully awake. Of course we want to hear it, Simone said. Grace cleared her throat dramatically and began to read. My mother, Simone Washington Bennett, is an entrepreneur. That means she started her own business. Her company is called EduPlay Technologies, and it makes computer programs that help kids learn math and reading and science in fun ways. But before she was a successful businesswoman, my mama was just a mama trying to take care of me. We didn't have very much money, and sometimes we didn't have enough food. But Mama never stopped believing in education and kindness and hope. One day when I was 5 years old, I did something that changed our whole life. I asked a nice man in a restaurant if I could have his leftover food, and I told him a secret about how Mama was hungry. That man was Christopher Bennett, who is now my daddy. Daddy Christopher helped us, but not just with money. He helped Mama get a job where she could use her smart brain. And then Mama created amazing computer programs that help kids like me learn better. Now thousands of kids use my mama's apps to learn, and Mama has her own company with lots of employees. She proves that if you work hard and never give up and have people who believe in you, you can achieve your dreams. My mama is the best entrepreneur in the world because she doesn't just want to make money. She wants to help kids have better lives. And she's the best mama in the world because she taught me that being brave and asking for help when you need it isn't scary. Smart. The end. When Grace finished reading, both Christopher and Simone were crying. That's beautiful, baby, Simone said, pulling Grace close. But you know what? None of it would have happened without you. You were the brave one who asked for help. You were the one who brought our family together. Grace considered this seriously. I think we all helped each other, she concluded. That's what families do. As Christopher listened to this 8-year-old's wisdom, he reflected on how profoundly his life had changed. Grace's simple request for leftovers had led to love, purpose, success, and now a growing family. But more than that, it had taught him that the most important business in life wasn't about profit margins or market share. It was about the connections we make, the love we share, and the hope we give to each other. Sometimes the biggest deals really were made by children who understood that kindness was the most powerful force in the world. And sometimes the most valuable secrets were shared over leftovers by little girls who knew that asking for help was just another way of saying, I believe in love. Would you believe that one simple act of kindness could create a business empire and a beautiful family? If this story moved you, please subscribe and share your thoughts about the power of compassion in the comments. What would you do if Grace approached your table today?